Hello and welcome to Moneylife. This is Sucheta Dalal. This week, we are again going to discuss the market regulator, the Securities and Exchange Board of India. You've been following my blogs and you know what I've been saying, that one after the other, SEBI's orders get overturned in an extremely embarrassing manner. And things couldn't have got worse in the last few weeks because a lot of these are legacy issues. One is not blaming anybody who's in charge now. Many of these things go back 5, 10 years because investigations in India drag. But remember, SEBI is one of the most powerful regulators in the world. In fact, in 2013, after an ordinance which then got passed by the UPA government, it was given enormous powers, apparently to go after collective investment schemes, but it could arrest, search, seizures, whatever it wanted to do. In 2015, we had a new government, the NDA. They realized that you can't just give so many powers to SEBI. There has to be some checks and balances like there are in the rest of the world. And they diluted them slightly, which means that SEBI had to take permission from a special court before it could go around doing search and seizure and arrest. Point is, even today, this is on par with most of the world's powerful regulators. Question that comes to mind to most of us who are observing what's happening, looking at various cases, broker defaults, exchange scams, the question that comes to our mind is, why isn't SEBI using all these powers effectively? Why are its orders weak? Why is it that it's getting embarrassed in appellate tribunals, in the Supreme Court? To my mind, to be effective, a regulator needs to know how to prioritize investigations that have a market-wide impact. Also, it needs to decide what is important in terms of how many people are affected. Reporting requirements and disclosure rules, which SEBI focuses on, indeed have their place. But for effective enforcement, you have to be tactical. You have to use your investigation resources skillfully. You have to have enough of data, documents to create a well-argued, timely order that can stand up in appeals. Because it's not enough for SEBI to say wrongdoing, ban you from the market, impose a fine. It is acutely embarrassing when that's thrown out on appeal, whether it is at the Securities Appellate Tribunal or by a high court or by the Supreme Court. And this is happening over and over again. In fact, I believe that there are so many mistakes and SEBI is dumping us with endless red tape, which it thinks passes for enforcement. But this is in fact out of sync with fast-paced developments that constantly happen in the market. And it's not just India. Today, you're affected by things that happen around the world. So you cannot have the regulator looking at first in, first out, blinkered approach to investigations, telling us, yes, we're investigating things, and it goes on for 5 and 10 years. In fact, all this raises questions, and it has led to a series of humiliating setbacks for the regulator in the past few weeks. Let's look at what these are. So this month, 20th March, the Supreme Court not only refused to stay an order with regard to the co-location scam of 2015. This is a story that I had broken in Moneylife, but it also asked SEBI to refund 300 crores to the National Stock Exchange out of over 1,000 crores that it had impounded as disgorgement, right? It didn't stand. This SAT had reduced it to 1,000 to 100 crore, and Supreme Court says, return the money. How embarrassing is this? But this was not a surprise to any of us who had read what the Securities Appellate Tribunal had to say on 23rd Jan. And in fact, I've said it before, but let me quote again a stinging remark in the SAT order. And I'm going to quote it here. It says, before we conclude, we must observe that when serious allegations were made against a first-level regulator, namely NSE, SEBI should have been proactive, should have conducted the investigation seriously. We find that SEBI had adopted a slow approach and, in fact, was placing a protective cover over the NSE's alleged misdeeds. It is only when questions were placed on the floor of Parliament that SEBI woke up and instituted an investigation. It then goes on to say, In our opinion, considering the gravity of the alleged charges, SEBI should have itself conducted an investigation stroke inquiry instead of delegating it to the NSE to conduct an investigation. It is strange and it does not stand to reason as to how SEBI directed NSE to conduct an investigation against itself. It's clear that a casual approach was adopted. End quote. Isn't that stunning? And SEBI ran with this to the Supreme Court. Supreme Court was not impressed, did not grant it a stay against this order, asked it to return 300 crore. Now come to the next one. A little earlier, on 14th March, the Supreme Court pulled up the regulator for, believe it or not, filing frivolous cases. This was in Suzlon Energy. The case details are not important here, but imagine what the apex court is telling our regulator, whom we depend on to protect us as investors. On 2nd March, the same Supreme Court appointed a committee of outsiders. In fact, I have said before that many of them have very deep roots to the corporate world, didn't stop it. The Supreme Court wanted it to look at volatility in the market, share prices of Adani. But again, as I wrote in an article and said in an earlier blog, the key part here is one line. The committee's mandate includes to investigate whether there has been regulatory failure in dealing with the alleged contravention of laws pertaining to securities market in relation to the Adani Group or other companies, which means you are going to oversee and check what the regulator has been doing. An expert committee from outside, not comprising government enforcement agencies, for the first time ever in an unprecedented action, will investigate the regulator. If this is not embarrassing enough, we have been writing about other things which have not gone there as yet. And we also agree that SEBI seems to be doing what SAT said, which is to play pass the parcel. SEBI's reluctance to conduct its own investigations needs to be checked before it becomes a regular tactic to avoid responsibility. In fact, our columnist V. Ranganathan had written in Moneylife, and you can take a link and go and look at it, an article which pulled up SEBI for its order on Cafe Coffee Day Enterprises. It said SEBI had shirked its responsibility in appointing a law firm to recover money diverted by the promoter V.G. Siddhartha, who tragically committed suicide. Now, all of you know it. I mean, lots of things happen over a cup of coffee. Almost every one of you who is watching this video blog has gone to what we call CCD. The company itself is CDEL, Coffee Day Enterprises Limited. And all of us really felt bad when V.G. Siddhartha committed suicide, but we may have read, and as Mr. Ranganathan also pointed out, this was a fairly simple and straightforward case. Why? Because when Mr. Siddhartha took this tragic step in July 2019, he apparently wrote a letter to the board of directors in which he admitted to large-scale diversion of funds. That note also, of course, exonerated the board and other people. He said, I take sole responsibility for what happened. The board after that did a series of things. It conducted a detailed investigation headed by a retired senior police officer, DIG, and also had a law firm look at it. They came up with very, very detailed findings. The important part of those findings are that their investigation uncovered diversion of 3,535 crore from 7 subsidiaries of the CDEL group. The CDEL group incidentally had plenty of subsidiaries, but all money from these subsidiaries was diverted because it's difficult to see what happens through a plethora of subsidiaries that a company would have, and it went to the promoter group itself. Now, the CDSL board sought advice from a retired judge on what should it do about recovering money diverted to the subsidiaries. He advised them to file commercial suits for the recovery. They initiated this process from 2019 or whenever the investigation was over until now, when SEBI issued its order, only 110 crore had been recovered. Remember, the total amount diverted is not 3,535 crore. This is how much this committee, or rather this senior police officer, has found. The whole controversy was bigger. But for SEBI, this was an open and shut case. This is the amount. It had to go and file a case to recover the money, instead of which the SEBI order gets into copious details, money trail, what happened, charts, graphs, tables. But all these were done by the senior police officer and the law firm. What SEBI had to do is to go after at least 3,535 crore and bring it back. Because if that kind of money is brought back, it impacts the share price. And hopefully, investors who had lost a lot of money are going to recover something, at least when the price goes up. And CDEL is not doing all that well. What is important here is that the order by SEBI pointed out and noted that VG Siddhartha was given a completely free hand to do what he wanted. He used to collect blank checks for fund transfers done by him. This, SEBI also notes, is an admission that CDEL, Coffee Day Enterprises, was run like a personal fiefdom with no checks and balances in place, and the directors were guilty of willful dereliction of duties, SEBI's words. Now, if SEBI is so confident about all this, shouldn't there have been a hard order? Yeah, it imposed a penalty of 26 crore on Coffee Day Enterprises, which was immediately stayed by the appellate tribunal on 3rd March. So that's gone out of the window. The rest of the order ends in a whimper. SEBI asked CDL, and remember, this is important. CDL is not now with an independent professional management. It is headed by Siddhartha's wife, Malavika Hegde. She's the CEO. She's on the board of directors. The company now headed by her will appoint apparently an independent law firm in consultation with NSE. SEBI wants to have nothing to do with something high profile. All of us had coffee. It's very high profile. Completely simple and straightforward. Because the promoter who committed suicide wrote that he was involved in wrongdoing and diverted funds. Yet SEBI doesn't want to touch it. NSE will consult with a law firm appointed by Siddhartha's wife and recover the money. SEBI has no idea that litigation in India goes on for decades. And by the time that happens, who on earth in this scenario has any special interest in ensuring that the money comes back? It's a regulator's job. And don't tell me the regulator, which is growing so much, has no time for this. It has to hand it over to the NSE. NSE is a for-profit organization supposed to run a trading platform. That is the main job that it is supposed to do. Regulate brokers. We know that it's not doing that very well either. Ensure that there are no scams. We know that's not being done well either. But SEBI thinks, I don't have the time, NSE will look at it, right? Where does this leave CDSL investors who were badly affected when that fraud happened and the promoter whom they had put a lot of faith in committed suicide? SEBI seems to forget its first duty. And to me, this is absolutely shirking responsibility. And there's a pattern to it. Now, it turns out that appointing an outside law firm, not doing it itself, is not the first time. SEBI has taken its cue from another case passed by G. Mahalingam, a whole-time member in CG Power and Industrial Solutions, the Crompton Greaves company. CG Power, highly controversial. You know the action that happened against its promoter. This order dates back to September 2019. In that order also, SEBI delegated responsibility to CG Power itself to take all necessary steps to recover funds siphoned or diverted by misrepresentation and manipulation of books. The difference is, instead of NSE, it asked Bombay Stock Exchange to appoint an audit firm, conduct a forensic audit, and report to the regulator. I'm just curious, what is SEBI so busy with? Keep tinkering with red tape and regulation, deploy more people in your investigation department, prioritize important cases. This was an equally high-profile controversy, but SEBI is in a hurry to delegate. Delegates other things, but high-profile cases? Now, I spoke to a series of securities law experts, former regulators, and everybody agrees with my viewpoint. And they also point out, obviously, not everyone wants to be quoted because they're appearing before SEBI all the time. They also point out that outsourcing a forensic audit may be all right in some cases. You want to look at the books or whatever, you have the powers. But high-profile cases will not get your undivided attention as a regulator. So CDEL is high profile, CG Power is high profile, NSE Colo scam was high profile. SEBI is large enough to have a cadre of trained forensic auditors and tech experts on its rolls to conduct these investigations. It does not need to outsource it to NSE. NSE doesn't have a cadre, nor does BSE, to handle the work given to it. There is also no serious accountability. We don't want to wait for years and have SEBI crack the whip on them. We want the regulator to do the job itself. SEBI has passed under Section 11C(1)(b) of the Act to appoint any person as an investigating authority, which means that it could have appointed directly instead of going through the exchange, and get the law firm appointed, ensure that the money came, supervise the law firm's work directly, and ask it what is happening every 3 months. Instead of which, SEBI wants to delegate powers all the time. Such actions, to my mind, make the regulator appear weak and ineffectual. In fact, Advocate P.R. Ramesh, who spent a long time in SEBI, puts it quite well. He says SEBI has more powers than is believed to be the case. Staff levels have also increased over time, but much needs to be done to address the perception of being ineffective or slow in big matters. Yeah, there is one Reliance case that's going on for 20 years, and we talk about this on and off. Perception is important. This perception is universal. SEBI has to recognize it. The SEC uses these powers to avoid long-drawn litigation, but all the details of the charges it makes are in the public domain. A huge amount is paid, and without admitting or denying guilt, the cases are settled. In India, we put a jumble of sections and subsections. We don't exactly say what was the charge. So as investors, we know there's a settlement. We don't know whether the amount paid is proportionate to the problem that's happened. And we don't know exactly what the problem is because SEBI doesn't reveal anything while saying we follow a disclosure-based regime. There's no disclosure to us, the investors, who need it the most and who it's supposed to protect. In fact, in contrast, SEBI's search and seizure actions seem concentrated on smaller market intermediaries, anchors of television channels, smaller brokers. Large investigations drag on. In fact, all investigations drag on until they lose relevance. Here's the irony. You want a T+1 settlement. You want trading happening in micro and milliseconds, okay, not even nanoseconds. I've written about all this. But you do not want investigations to be completed faster. I've written about enormous times when mindless investigations are gone through painstakingly for 4 and 5 years, bunch of people, enormous paper. In fact, those of you who are interested, please look at the links that we're putting up on the screen. In one of them, I said SEBI needs a powerful chief to stop the market from regressing back to the 90s because they were wasting time on investor complaints in cases where, believe it or not, the companies had been delisted and even the exchanges closed. But adjudication was going on, 75 cases, 40 cases settled in one stroke. I've also said that SEBI takes different stands on similar issues. It has not created jurisprudence. It does not check its own cases. So a similar insider trading case will be like, show me the person and I'll decide the fine. So huge amount in one case, small amount in another, one stand in one case, exactly the opposite stand in another. This is happening time and again, and I have written about it regularly. Now, if SEBI officials are reluctant to take full responsibility for investigation and action, then maybe the finance ministry should step in. Because when something goes to the Supreme Court and it says, I'll set up a committee, this is embarrassing not just for SEBI, it's embarrassing to the finance ministry, which is the administrative ministry for SEBI. So in 2003 and 4, long ago, there was a proposal to set up an independent investigation, surveillance, and enforcement authority. This is important, mind you, because the same set of whole-time members and chairmen who actually call the shots, they decide policy, they decide implementation, and they also decide surveillance and enforcement. So this reluctance to go far or to try and fix a problem by more rules, this kind of conflict keeps happening. And SEBI seems to focus on endless policy, regulation, and disclosure because that's what its officers prefer. The rest of it, try and do a settlement. It's too high profile to settle. And remember, they were even trying to settle the NSE Colo scam. It's too high profile to settle, drag it on. That is creating a loss of credibility. I've said you need to press the reset button, go back to basics, change how you prioritize things, become more tactical, but give us results, because only those have a deterrent impact. High profile cases handled fast and well send a signal that you can't get away with it, right? The small fry is scared and they keep quiet. If you agree with this, please share it. There is going to be a committee. If you're trading in the market, you're one of those millions of people who have come post-COVID. You need to understand these issues because it's going to keep affecting you time and again. So subscribe to Moneylife and share this video. Thank you.